Okay, so welcome to episode 60 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK network at paukradio.com. So we've hit the big 60, which is quite ironic as I'm actually galloping towards that age myself. I've just had my 58th birthday. So yeah, I just hope that the episode numbers keep ahead of my birthday going forward. So delighted to have another guest from over the pond, as they say, another guest from the States. My guest is Dr. Bruce Rapuano. Please tell me I got that right, Bruce.
Very good.
Thank you. Bruce is an author. You're also a doctor and a surgeon. Is that correct?
Actually, Doctor of Philosophy, PhD in
Okay.
neuroscience.
Right. Okay. My apologies. Because you sent me a very impressive bio, which really I suppose I should ask you tell me a bit about yourself. That's probably the easiest way of doing it.
Well, I had an interest in neurobiology from a young age. I majored in neurobiology and minored in psychology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and became really so much in love with the subject. I went on to get a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Connecticut in neuropharmacology. Neuropharmacology is a study of the effects of drugs on the brain. And done a lot of things in research as a independent biomedical research scientist. Worked in cancer research at top cancer research center in America, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York City, as a cell biologist. And I also did some, actually, for most of my career, worked at the top orthopedic hospital, also in New York City, the Hospital for Special Surgery, where I did a lot of research on developing the next generation of artificial knees and artificial hips. I learned a lot about material science while we worked in the area of metabolic bone diseases and arthritis and lupus and so forth. And in the meantime, I've managed to get a law degree, a JD from from New York Law School here in New York City, because I was very interested in that subject, although I'm not a practicing attorney. And maintained a lifelong interest in the subject of UFOs, and found out that I was that was a that I was not only was that an interesting subject, that I was an interesting subject to another civilization, and that's the topic of my book.
So we'll get on to your book actually,
Mhm.
which is obviously the main reason why we wanted to have a chat today. Can I just say that's probably the most impressive bio that I've had of all my guests, with all due respect to my guests that I've had on over the years. Yeah, so your book's called Dominion Lost, a scientist's own alien abduction encounters. So let's go back to the beginning then. How did this all start for you?
The experiences, or writing the book.
The experiences.
The experiences. The experiences began at the most common age that quote unquote alien abductees report their first experience, at the age of 6. And as it turns out, it happened just 2 or 3 months before the famous abduction case of Betty and Barney Hill, which occurred in New Hampshire in September of 1961. And my first experience happened just 2 or 3 months before that, either late June or late July of 61. And it was quite a remarkable experience. I didn't know what to make of it at the time, but I was just in bed shortly before dusk and nodding off to sleep. And I saw a flash of light, a reflection of light outside my bedroom window, looked toward my right outside the window, and saw the strangest looking airplane I'd ever seen in my life. It was had a highly polished surface. It was still highly reflective in the waning sunlight. And what I noticed about it was the fuselage, or the diameter of the fuselage was very large compared to the length. In other words, it looked more circular than tubular. Thought I saw wings. And what was a little bit alarming at the time is, as I'm watching this with fascination, I see what I think is a bolt of lightning or uh, some static discharge of electricity near the tail of the airplane. I thought it was an airplane, but it was a very strange looking one, just flying silently, maybe right over the rooftops of the apartment buildings in our neighborhood, maybe 5 or 6 blocks away from where I was. Then I did something very strange. I was a very curious child, and ordinarily I would have been fascinated to watch this object, strange object, for as long as I could. Instead, I turned my head away from it, turned my head to the left, put my head down on the pillow, immediately fell asleep. And when I woke up, I wasn't in my bedroom any longer. I was in what looked like some type of I don't know, hospital or surgical amphitheater. And I was on a table, examination table. I don't remember if it felt cold to the touch, but I remember it was a hard surface. And what I distinctly remember was the length and width of that table was much larger than would be required for a 6-year-old child's body. Excuse me. And then, as I'm trying to regain my faculties, I notice some commotion maybe 20 feet from the foot of the table. And I slowly sit up and I see dozens of humanoid beings. And they were no taller than I was, 3.5 to 4 foot tall, all white in color. They look like clones of one another, identical, one by one to one in height and anatomical appearance, all with disproportionately large hairless heads. I couldn't see features because I was looking at them from the side, but half of them were walking briskly from right to left and half in the other direction, but literally dozens. I got the impression I was in a large building. I don't know where I was, where there probably were other rooms like the room I was in, which was separated from where these alien beings were by some type of I call it a garage doorway type entrance. But I didn't know where the door was, but it was no larger than that. And I think I'll stop there to leave more for the reader, and also leave opportunity for you to ask any questions about this incident.
Okay, so obviously you were at a very young age. How did you sort of react at this moment in time?
Good question. My initial reaction, was one of indignation. I sat as I'm sitting there. I pointed at the beings and I said, "Hey, you're not my doctors." And that's essentially how the memory ends. But going forward, Craig, months after that, because I'd had some ear infections in the preceding winter, and that was in the summertime when this experience occurred, and then they recurred after in that fall and early winter later in the year. I came to the belief that this was a procedure that I had to have to cure my ear infections. It was that real to me.
Yeah.
In fact, going forward a couple months into February of the next year, I had to have my tonsils and adenoids removed. And I remember going under anesthesia and telling the doctor, who was quite surprised at my question. I said to him, "Doctor, why did I have to have 2 operations?" And he had a very startled look on his face and never answered my question. Beyond that, I believe this is how I integrated the experience into my everyday life. Didn't have any other questions about it, no emotional trauma, and never brought it up or thought about it for maybe 20 years, until all these great books came out in the 80s in the US talking about alien abduction. And I kind of connected the dots and found that there were so many people that were having detail for detail, almost the same exact experiences I had had as a child.
Was there any communication at all? Did they, was there any verbal communication or any telepathic communication, or did they just not communicate with you at all that you remember?
Yes, I have to say it took several forms.
Oh,
For example, during that particular incident, I just recall, I just related to you. Um, I wondered, I didn't speak, but I wondered in my mind for some reason, because all the beings look so uniform in appearance. I wondered, were there just boys, or were there boys and girls? I thought they were, initially I thought they were children. Then I came to the realization that they were doctors of some type. And it was as if someone was eavesdropping on my internal dialogue. And I was made to understand, yes, in fact, both sexes were represented in this group of beings. I don't know how I came to that realization, but it was just as if someone made me understand that. I've had other instances where I heard a voice during a period of missing time, or during another type of abduction encounter, a voice that I knew was not my own voice, instructing me, telling me to, go along with the program, go back to sleep, or, you know, almost issuing me commands that I very willingly, for some reason, went along with.
yeah,
Which is very, very common among abductees. I think the great majority of them report some type of communication
yeah,
that's telepathic. Very, very few, a very small percentage of them ever report any type of verbal communication. That's quite atypical.
yeah. That's a sort of recurring theme, isn't it? That it's all telepathic communication. You mentioned, so there's a couple of things I picked up on, and I will tease this out of you. Um,
Hmm.
the first one you mentioned is an instance of missing time, which I'm really interested in. So can you
Yes.
go into that in a bit more detail?
I'll give you an example. It would be a great follow-up incident to the one I just uh, discussed with you. And it was the same year. I was the same age of 6 years old. It was probably later in that year. I remember, not too cold. It was probably in the fall sometime. And I didn't know what I'd been doing that day. But I was all alone in our apartment, a 6 year old home alone. I didn't know what I'd done any time during the day, but found myself with my back against the wall in the hallway between our front door and bathroom, and felt some moisture under my nose. I thought I was having a runny nose, but I didn't remember what I'd been doing before that. And then I heard a voice in my head. So I had this missing time. And again, this telepathic communication. I knew it was my own voice, but it was telling me, don't let them see the blood. I didn't even know I was bleeding from my nose. But that prompted me to rush to the bathroom, which was just a few steps away. I looked in the mirror and was horrified to see a stream of blood from each nostril that had already reached my chin, and very quickly ran the tap, washed the water, got some water, washed the blood off my face. Not more than 10, 20 seconds later, my mother and brother come into the apartment, but I had gotten rid of the evidence almost under command. Um, Now, I do, as I say, I don't remember what happened before that, but this clearly, since unexplained strange nosebleeds are such a common feature of the core alien abduction experience, I would have to attribute this incident to another alien abduction event.
Because you mentioned in your book about one of the chapters is about an implant procedure,
Mhm.
which you've kindly sent me a breakdown of the book, and it's chapter 7, the alien nasal implant procedure.
Mhm.
Sorry, I've got my window up because it's quite humid here for the time of year, and I've got a few flies buzzing around now. Um, they've been attracted to the light, so who knows what's going to come through the window. Yeah, sorry. So the chapter 7 is the alien nasal implant procedure. and obviously that had medical consequences. So can you go into that in a bit more detail?
Well, I want to give a preamble to that, and that is, I also recall my first recollection of this particular object that I had was also at the age of 6. It was a flashback type of memory, just a fleeting memory of an object that was like a BB from a gun, a BB gun, maybe a circular metallic sphere, 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter. I think it was silver in color, but I definitely was certain that it had studs of projections on the outside. Along with this flashback memory, I had a memory that I was told that I had to be careful if I sneezed too forcefully, blew my nose too hard, it could come out, and suggested to me that that had happened at some time before. And that's how I knew. And I had this flashback memory several times later in my life. But that associated memory of, be careful, this could come out of your nose, told me that it was a nasal implant.
Right.
Now, the chapter you're referring to is a chapter where I talk about my grandfather having this very, very rare condition, infection called cavernous sinus thrombosis, which was a blood clot and infection in one of the blood sinuses behind the nasal cavity. And in doing some research for this, I found that isolated cases where there's no prior medical surgical procedure, dental procedure, are very this when that happens in an isolated form, the incidence is extremely low, 1 in 19 million people. But then I discuss, as I discussed in that chapter that you're referring to, that particular type of infection and its likelihood of spreading to the meninges of the brain, causing meningitis, goes up dramatically, thousands, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 fold in certain types of surgical procedures where surgeons use the nasal cavity as an approach to remove a tumor from the pituitary gland. So based on that, I speculate that it's far more likely that my grandfather had the same encounters that I had, that my participation in this alien abduction program was part of an intergenerational program that has been discussed in the UFO abduction literature at length, that the aliens that are kidnapping, abducting people, doing experiments on them, seem to be interested in specific bloodlines. But as I conclude in the chapter, it's far more likely that my grandfather had an implantation procedure like I had, which caused his infection and meningitis that took his life, than a medical, abnormality that occurs once in 19 million people. So that's why the conclusion of the chapter is that my experience reflects what has been talked about by alien abduction investigators, in that there's a lot of evidence of this intergenerational interest on the part of the ETs or aliens,
Yeah.
When they abduct human beings.
Are there any other particularly famous cases that could also be attributed to that you know of?
Yes, there was a family in Indiana, and I think Bud Hop, the pioneering alien abduction investigator, Bud Hopkins, who was an artist in New York City, that wrote one of the seminal works in this field, Missing Time. I mean, he had found that there were 3 generations affected by this particular phenomenon, alien abduction phenomenon. And interestingly enough, the youngest generation first had the children of the woman that I guess he focused his investigation on. I think he calls her Kathy. I think her real name is Deborah Jordan. But she had 2 children, and one child had the same experience I had. Saw strange humanoid beings at the age of 6 years old, had a number of strange, unexplained nosebleeds, and had two doctors find a scar high up in the nasal cavity, excuse me, the back of the throat behind the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx, that in one case, um, the scar was still bleeding and had to be cauterized during a medical procedure. This child, at the same age I had a tonsillectomy, at which point this scar was discovered. I had the same thing happen to me during my tonsillectomy procedure. The surgeon even asked my father about this and whether I had put anything up my nose. My father asked me, and I had said no, that never happened. But in that particular family, this one child's experience mirrored so closely the experiences I had. And uh, Bud Hopkins had interviewed the mother, and I think either her aunt and I think her father was also involved. There was evidence that all three generations of the same family had been targeted um, by by the ETs. And so this is the most interesting and thought-provoking case that I'm aware of this intergenerational aspect of the phenomenon.
And is there any indication of why this happens? Why certain families or certain number of generations of certain families are targeted, shall we say?
Well, if there is a particular purpose, the the abductors are not forthcoming with the abductees as to why they're abducting them. So we can only speculate. Um, but there's been some work done by a scientist in the U.S. by the name of Dr. Gary Nolan that suggests there's some parallels in the um, structure of the brain between people who can do remote viewing and people who've had the alien abduction experience, particularly in the basal ganglia. There's a certain region that has a denser nerve connections, and you can see that on an MRI, and that suggests that the experiencers of this phenomenon have a unique ability to either see interdimensional alien beings or communicate with them somehow. And that may be the reason why certain people are targeted, because it's easier for the aliens to interact with and communicate with certain individuals um, based on their genetic background. And I wonder if what they're doing, if one of the things they may be doing in the induction program is to genetically modify human beings as to facilitate interactions between our two species for some unknown purpose. So again, that's just speculation, but I think it it might be supported by some evidence that's been uh, gathered recently by scientists in the U.S. that are studying this phenomenon.
So was there any sort of lasting effects from the implant that you experienced?
The most common lasting effect would be a medical one. Many abductees report they have abductions begin in childhood, and they complain about lifelong chronic sinusitis, sinus problems, sinus headaches, which I've had. I've had chronic sinusitis my whole life. My father did. My father used to complain of sinus headaches. I never had any evidence in conversations with him that he also was part of this program. But as I say, I talk a lot about uh, evidence that my grandfather was. But I remember my father having the same sinus problems that I had. And other than that, and other than the unexplained nosebleeds, I can't attribute, fortunately in my case, any other medical consequences. But as I discussed with my grandfather, I think some of the consequences of these experiments that are done on human beings can be serious and potentially fatal. We don't know how many people have not come back after an
No,
abduction. We don't know.
no, that's very true. And worryingly, I suffered from very bad sinusitis myself, so you've now worried me somewhat.
Well, when did that begin?
Always,
Okay,
always. So who knows?
who
Um,
knows?
yeah, no, it's interesting. It really is. I think mine's just because I've got very large sinuses apparently, so
I see. Okay.
it could be that. Um, okay, so we don't want to give too much away in the book because obviously we want people to go out
Mhm.
and buy the book, and obviously read for themselves your experiences. I mean, can I ask if you've ever had any other experiences with? I mean, they call them. I assume that you would agree that these were sort of, would these be described as the grey aliens? These little small little creatures, would you call them greys?
Yeah.
There are various different names, aren't there, that people?
Yeah. Yes. I think I need to say that many abductees all, um, see gray aliens, and many see aliens with the same anatomical appearance, except that they're white in color. And a lot of abductees have also noted when on board a UFO that they have the impression that the skin of the gray alien is not really skin; it's some type of a suit, a protective suit, a biomechanical suit. It's not their skin. And the you know I do want to refer to something that I discussed in the last chapter of the book, and was the autopsy results of that the pathology doctors at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington purportedly did on the Roswell gray aliens, the aliens that were the alien bodies, actually I should say, that were found at the crash at Roswell. And they also found that there was an outer skin that was that seemed to be some type of a biomechanical suit that was strong, yet that seemed to be composed of interwoven fibers. And but below that there was an epidermis that was highly permeable, but they did notice this outer skin that was gray in color. So what I had seen a number of times during my life were aliens. Well, as I said before, that were the same height as the gray aliens, same disproportionately large hairless heads, but they were all white in color uniformly.
So I always get the image in my head when people talk about these grey aliens of close encounters of the third kind. So would you say that that's a sort of accurate representation? Do you think there's some sort of message that they were trying to deliver to us when they were making that film?
It's remarkable. When I saw that film 16 years after my first experience that I talked to you about,
Yeah.
they looked exactly like the beings I'd seen um, in 61. Um, and I found out later that Steven Spielberg had used, I think they were all girls, 6-year-old girls, to play the aliens, and they had some prosthetics to make their heads look larger.
Yeah.
But they were also 6 years old, and as it turns out, the average height for a 6-year-old is 3.5 to 4 feet. So I've often thought that Steven Spielberg had a lot of inside information. I know J. Allen Hynek, the famous consultant to Project Blue Book, the Ohio State astronomer that was one of the most famous UFO investigators. Again, as I said, that was associated with Project Blue Book, was a consultant for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I think that movie revealed a lot of what abductees had already known about and experienced. So I thought that was remarkable in that particular movie.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned also about bioengineering as well of these greys. Um, want to go into that in a bit more detail about how they could possibly be
I I
around?
was I was just captivated by reading um, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso's. He was the intelligence officer, Philip Corso, that was in charge of the foreign technology um, service of the U.S. Army um, in I think the 60s. And not only did he say he saw one of the alien cadavers, one of the graves, but he also read about and discussed those Walter Reed autopsy reports. But but in those autopsy reports, the doctors found that the internal anatomy revealed the aliens had no the grays had no digestive system, reproductive system, excretory system, no bladder, no kidneys, and concluded that the aliens must obtain nutrition through their skin and also excrete waste through their skin. And I discuss in that chapter, it's actually the afterword of the book, that 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 genetic engineering of the grays would be quite straightforward, even using human molecular biology, using the CRISPR gene editing technology that exists today. Knocking out one or two genes could knock out one organ system and or digestive system or reproductive system. But what it suggests to me is that some more advanced species, we don't know whether it's the blue Syrians or the Pleiadians, I have really no evidence as to what their nature might be, created the grays through genetic engineering for a specific purpose. And I suggest in the book that purpose is for the grays to act as technicians working under some more advanced species that are principal investigators in this abduction program, and they're simply engineered to be um, uh, workers or drones for this particular uh, program of experimentation on human beings. And the reason why certain organ systems are eliminated is to make more energy, more nutrition available for mental activity, for the brain. And this is, I discussed what's known in biology as the expensive tissue hypothesis, which relates to theories that human beings um, evolved in certain ways, evolved um, changes in the structure of their internal organs so that the brain would have more nutrition and would be able to develop into the larger brains that Homo sapiens possess compared to our earlier hominin ancestors.
And of course, the brains of these greys are proportionally larger,
Yes.
aren't they? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, the pathologist of Walter Reed noted that the brains looked, well, the overall anatomy physiology was remarkably similar to human beings, but the brains were larger and different. They were able to obtain EKG recordings, electrical recordings of brain activity, one particular gray alien, but I think they did note that the anatomy was slightly different, although basically similar to human neuroanatomy.
Yeah. Well, fascinating stuff. I'm sure reading the book will give us an even greater insight into theories and your personal experiences. Again, just remind me of the name of the book and where we can find it. There we go.
There it is. It's on Amazon, of course. Dominion Lost: The Scientist's Own Alien Abduction Encounters. And I have to say, Craig, that I have a much larger book. This is a bridge version, but I have a much science heavier version where I talk about how the implants work and what material they're made of, what type of energy they use, and what their purpose might be for those who are interested. You could read this book, and if your certain scientific questions are raised that you might want answered, you you can check out the unabridged version, which is the same title, this was about 200 pages. The unabridged version is about 450 pages, both on Amazon. And readers can check out what I'm doing, my appearances on my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages as well.
Okay, and they're all under Bruce Rapuano?
Yes, either under Dominion Lost on Instagram or Bruce Edward Rapuano on Facebook.
Excellent. Well,
Thanks.
I shall find the links, and I shall put the links in the description for this
Great.
podcast, so listeners can just go and follow us. It's been fascinating talking to you. Really interesting book subject. Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
And hopefully I will speak to you again at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Craig. I appreciate it.
No problem. You're welcome. Thank you so much.